Today, Prince William doubles down. According to multiple sources, it's now a matter of when, not if, he strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles.
The British monarchy has stood for over 1,000 years. It has survived wars, abdications, assassinations, and constitutional crises that would have shattered lesser institutions. But nothing in living memory has shaken Buckingham Palace the way this has. A secret bank account, offshore shell companies registered in jurisdictions specifically chosen for their financial opacity, payments that lined up almost perfectly with the most private and protected moments of the royal family, a christening, a high-level state dinner, a confidential strategy meeting behind closed doors at Sandringham, moments that were never supposed to leave the room. And right now, as you are watching this video, the consequences are falling fast on the Sussex household. King Charles has approved a set of formal directives stripping Meghan Markle of privileges she has held since stepping back from royal duties. Prince William is actively preparing for the public fallout. And Princess Anne, the woman who has led this investigation with the precision of a surgeon and the determination of a general, has just delivered the 4 most chilling words the palace has issued in modern history. The Crown has spoken. But here is the question I need you to sit with right now, before we go a single second further. I want you to genuinely think about this. Did Prince Harry know? Because the answer to that question doesn't just affect Harry personally. It affects everything: his assets, his future, his legal standing on 2 continents, his relationship with his children, potentially his freedom. We are going to go through this story from the very beginning. Every layer, every document, every player. And by the end of this video, you will have the complete picture. The one the mainstream headlines are only partially telling. Stay with me, because what is coming will genuinely surprise you. The audit that changed everything. Royal scandals don't erupt from nowhere. They never do. They begin quietly, with a number that doesn't match, with a date that shouldn't align, with one person in one office asking one question that nobody expected would unravel anything significant. That person was Margaret Hartley, nearly 20 years inside the Royal Finance Office, a senior accountant who has reviewed budgets, invoices, and expenditure reports across multiple reigns. She is not someone who panics easily. She is not someone who jumps to conclusions. She is methodical, patient, and deeply experienced in the way royal money moves, across departments, across households, across the complex web of institutional accounts that fund the monarchy's operations. She knows, better than almost anyone, what normal looks like, which means she also knows, with absolute certainty, when something is wrong. In early April 2026, during what should have been a routine year-end audit, Hartley was reviewing Sussex family spending from the period when Harry and Meghan were still working royals. Standard procedure. Nothing about it on the surface suggested it would become historic. But Hartley doesn't skim. She doesn't assume. She follows the numbers wherever they lead. Except it did, because the numbers weren't wrong. They were too right. She began by comparing payment dates against the publicly available royal schedule. Then she cross-referenced invoices against actual events. Then she went a level deeper, comparing the timing of private, non-public royal occasions against the inflows into an account she had flagged for closer review. And the more she examined the data, the more a pattern emerged that had no innocent explanation. Payments were landing in an account at moments that corresponded, almost exactly, with private royal events. Not public-facing occasions, not the kind of appearances you'd read about in the morning papers. These were internal moments, confidential, restricted. The kind of information that, under the Crown's own financial and security protocols, never leaves the building under any circumstances. A confidential strategy session at Sandringham, a high-level state dinner at Buckingham Palace, private christening arrangements for Archie. Each event, intimate, protected, known only to a carefully limited number of people, appeared to be followed, sometimes within days, by an incoming payment. The amounts were not trivial. £10,000 here, £25,000 there, sometimes considerably more. Originating from entertainment companies and media groups later found to be associated with exclusive coverage of events that, by all rights, should never have been covered at all. Events that, had standard royal confidentiality held, would have remained entirely unknown to those outside the palace walls. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something directly, and I genuinely want you to take a moment with it before we continue. When you see a financial pattern this precise, payments arriving in the days immediately following private royal moments over and over again, what does your instinct tell you? Is this coincidence? Is this the result of poor administrative judgment? Or is this something far more deliberate and far more serious? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because the discussion under this video has been extraordinary and your perspective matters. Because what the palace concluded, when the full analysis was complete, was nothing short of devastating. The internal memorandum published on March 31, 2026 stated without ambiguity that financial misconduct associated with the former Duchess of Sussex had triggered a full institutional review, initiated by the Princess Royal and overseen by senior forensic officers of the Crown. Read that phrase carefully. Forensic officers of the Crown. This is not a PR crisis being managed with carefully worded statements. This is not a family disagreement playing out in the tabloids. This is a structured, documented, forensically verified investigation into what the palace has determined is deliberate financial misconduct conducted from inside the royal family over a sustained period of years. And at the center of it all, Meghan Markle. Her team's response? Largely silence. California-based spokespeople offered short, vague remarks about her commitment to transparency, but they avoided, pointedly, conspicuously, acknowledging the offshore structures entirely. Not a denial, not a rebuttal, just a careful, strategic sidestep, which tells you something. Because when you have nothing to hide, you say so. And when you have everything to hide, you say as little as possible and hope the story moves on. This story is not moving on. The offshore architecture. This is the segment where the story stops being about palace gossip and starts being about something far more deliberate, something that required planning, expertise, and a sophisticated understanding of how to move money in ways that are difficult to trace. According to internal financial memoranda reviewed by senior palace officials, the offshore structure allegedly tied to Meghan's interests did not emerge spontaneously or accidentally. It unfolded in precise, measured stages, each one building on the last, each one adding another layer of legal insulation. Here is the timeline, as reconstructed by Margaret Hartley's forensic team. Late 2018, a consultancy pipeline is quietly established. Low profile, nothing that would raise flags in isolation. Just a business arrangement, the kind that a high-profile media personality might set up for entirely legitimate reasons. Shortly after, proxy companies are incorporated in the British Virgin Islands, a jurisdiction specifically chosen by countless international entities for the financial privacy it affords. Again, offshore banking is legal. That must be stated clearly. Legality, however, is not the same as transparency. And transparency within the royal household is not optional. It is constitutional. Then comes Delaware, a shell company registered in one of the most permissive business environments in the United States. No employees, no office, no visible operating purpose. Just a legal entity capable of receiving and distributing funds with minimal public disclosure. March 2019, a Channel Islands account is opened. By this point, the structure is fully operational, capable of receiving significant payments without immediately triggering the kind of institutional scrutiny that a straightforward bank account would attract. The problem, as palace investigators were careful to emphasize, was not the offshore account itself. The problem was timing, volume, and correlation. Because each stage of this structure was built during a period when Meghan and Harry were still full working royals, when she still held royal titles, attended royal engagements, participated in royal briefings, and sat in rooms where sensitive institutional information was routinely shared. Margaret Hartley's timeline showed that payments into these accounts repeatedly coincided with specific private royal events. A confidential briefing here, a state occasion there, the private christening of Archie. Moments that carried information, operational, strategic, personal, that the Crown's security protocols were specifically designed to protect. The conclusion drawn by the forensic investigators was unavoidable. Information was leaking, and someone was being paid for it. One particularly troubling trail involved a Los Angeles media firm whose payment history aligned precisely with internal royal scheduling sessions. In one documented case, a briefing conducted at Clarence House regarding planned Commonwealth tours appeared to be mirrored days later in a tabloid report featuring details of uncanny specificity. Hartley's analysis concluded this indicated premeditated release of sensitive operational information, not coincidental or leaked reporting. Let that word sit with you. Premeditated. This is why King Charles described the matter as a direct violation of the sanctity of royal trust. This is why Prince William, upon reviewing the same documents, reportedly sat in silence for nearly a full minute before closing the folder and stating 3 words that those present have not forgotten. "This ends here." Not shouted, not emotional, quiet, final. The kind of statement that, once made, cannot be walked back. And those in the room interpreted it not as anger, but as a declaration from a man who understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of king he intended to be. Princess Anne takes command. Throughout all of this, one figure has been operating at a level of intensity that even veteran royal observers have described as extraordinary. And if you have underestimated Princess Anne up to this point, this is the moment you recalibrate. The Princess Royal, the hardest-working member of the royal family year after year by almost every measurable standard. A woman who has served the crown with a discipline and consistency that staff working under 4 separate reigns describe as the closest living embodiment of Queen Elizabeth's own uncompromising standards. When Anne was assigned to oversee this investigation, those who know her understood immediately what it would look like. It would not involve softening the findings for palatability. It would not involve political considerations about public perception. It would not involve any calculation other than one. What does the evidence actually say? By the 3rd week of the investigation, Anne had moved beyond oversight. She was commanding. Behind closed doors at St. James's Palace, she convened what insiders now call the pivotal session, a private meeting that lasted nearly 4 hours. With senior legal counsel, the Lord Chamberlain, Margaret Hartley, and 2 external forensic consultants operating under strict confidentiality agreements. For 4 hours, she pressed. Every discrepancy, every unexplained transaction, every breach of protocol identified in the growing dossier. She asked for clarity, and she did not move on until she had it. One advisor present described her demeanor as stern, unyielding, and entirely focused on structural integrity rather than personal drama. Another said simply, "This was Anne at her purest form. Zero tolerance for manipulation, no patience for excuses, absolute loyalty to the crown." It was during this session that Hartley unveiled the most troubling discovery of the entire investigation, a series of internal communications from 2019 indicating that Meghan had declined to use the designated royal financial oversight channels for certain engagements, routing contracts instead through her privately connected consultancy firms. At the time, those choices had been attributed to administrative misunderstanding, an institution learning curve for a new royal. Now, in context, they told a very different story, a deliberate, sustained pattern of financial circumvention. Anne's response was immediate. She authorized a comprehensive cross-referencing of all Sussex-related engagements between May 2018 and March 2020. Every department, Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, Clarence House, was required to submit archived records within 72 hours. Staff members who had since left royal employment were recalled to give sworn statements. The scale was without modern precedent, but what made the investigation truly extraordinary was not its size. It was the speed and unanimity with which every senior royal fell into alignment behind Anne. William told his private secretary, "We must protect the institution my grandmother devoted her life to. No one is exempt." Catherine quietly instructed her communications team to prepare for extended public engagement duties, a signal that the Princess of Wales was ready to step into the public-facing vacuum once the investigation reached its conclusion. King Charles personally reviewed documents detailing how the alleged information leaks coincided with sensitive family milestones, material that, if deliberately released, could have compromised private negotiations and state-facing preparations at the highest level. To Charles, this was not only financial impropriety, it was a violation of something deeper, the sanctity of royal trust that the entire institution rests upon. One palace historian compared the gravity of the moment to the constitutional crises of the 1990s, but even that comparison, most agreed, undersold what was happening. Because what was emerging from Hartley's investigation was not a reputational problem, it was structural sabotage. By the end of that pivotal week, Anne's working group produced a 64-page interim report, timeline charts, payment clusters, contract deviations, recovered emails whose phrasing, in the words of one senior official, left little room for interpretation. Anne reviewed the final page, closed the folder deliberately, and issued 6 words that have since become the defining statement of the entire investigation. "The Crown will not be compromised. Proceed." 2 sentences, no drama, no theatrics, just direction, and an absolute clarity of purpose that every person in that room understood perfectly. The legal trap Harry never saw coming. Now I need you to pay close attention to this next section, because this is the part of the story that most mainstream coverage is completely failing to communicate. Everyone is focused on Meghan, on the accounts, on the investigation, on the title being stripped. But the most legally vulnerable person in this entire situation is not Meghan. It is Harry, and the mechanism of his exposure is both elegant and devastating. From 2019 onward, according to palace sources and legal advisors on both sides of the Atlantic, Meghan's corporate interests, production equity, investments, and California-based business structures were placed, legally and deliberately, in the names of their 2 children, Archie and Lilibet. Take a moment with that. Those assets are not in Meghan's name. They are not jointly held as marital property. They are held by minors, their children, which places them effectively beyond the reach of certain forms of civil recovery, parliamentary inquiry, and asset dispute litigation. Meghan, legally speaking, does not own them in any way that makes her directly liable for them. Harry, meanwhile, signed several early operational documents during the period when they were still working royals, documents in which he was listed as the acting senior royal representative at the time of authorization. Those signatures put his name on instruments that Meghan's financial architecture was built upon. He authorized, he signed. His name is on the record. But the assets, the financial protections, the equity, those are in his children's names. The palace's internal legal review reached a conclusion that has since been described privately as one of the most legally precarious positions a member of the extended royal family has ever occupied. Harry held liability without authority. One senior aide described his situation with painful bluntness. He was a shield without armor. When Harry first grasped what this actually meant, when legal advisors in California sat him down and walked through the implications, the transformation was immediate and visible. The man who had stood publicly and declared he would stand unwaveringly with Meghan went silent. He retreated from public view. He began pacing, rereading documents, questioning timelines. His initial defiance, his insistence that the palace was persecuting his wife, that the institution had always been against her, that this was simply more of the same, began to crack. Because the legal consequences were not pointing at Meghan. They were pointing at him. One insider said, "He has realized he may walk away from this with nothing. And for the first time, he is asking questions he should have asked years ago." Here is the question I want to put to you right now, and I want your honest answer in the comments. Do you believe Harry genuinely didn't know about these offshore structures? Or do you think he chose not to ask? Because some part of him didn't want the answer. Because there is a significant legal and moral difference between those two things. And that difference may ultimately determine whether Harry is treated as a victim of an elaborate financial deception, or as a participant, however passive, in the structure that enabled it. The palace, for its part, has already drawn its own quiet conclusion. In one rare moment of private candor, recounted by a senior aide, "For years we assumed naivety, but naivety does not construct networks of shell companies." Those words have echoed through every briefing room and legal assessment since. Harry, according to those close to him, now fears three specific outcomes above everything else. Financial eradication if asset disputes are formally escalated. Institutional severance if he continues to publicly defend Meghan. And the release of documents implicating him indirectly should Parliament become involved. One advisor captured his state of mind with a line that has since spread through royal circles. "He is a man staring at the wreckage of choices he thought were made in love." His silence is no longer defiance, it is calculation. Cold, frightened, necessary calculation. The title is stripped. By the morning of December 12th, as dawn settled over Buckingham Palace, the investigation had reached its endpoint, not because the facts were exhausted, but because the Crown had assembled everything it needed to act, decisively, permanently, without retreat. Princess Anne convened what palace sources now describe simply as the final consolidation meeting. It was brief, it was decisive, and by any historical measure, it was historic. Margaret Hartley presented the concluding audit summary, a coherent, meticulously reconstructed account of offshore transfers, concealed earnings, information for payment exchanges, and deliberate circumvention of royal financial protocols. The document left no ambiguity. The patterns were intentional. The structures were built to hide and to deflect. And the primary beneficiary was unquestionably connected to Meghan Markle. Anne's reaction was, characteristically, blunt. "We protect our own by protecting the institution first, and the Crown has now spoken." Shortly before noon that day, King Charles approved a set of formal internal directives. Here is what those directives mean in concrete terms. Meghan will no longer be entitled to any privileges associated with former working royals, a category of benefit that had, until this investigation, remained intact despite the Sussex departure from royal duties. Those privileges are now gone. Her financial dealings related to her time as a working royal are now subject to ongoing Crown oversight. The audit does not close when the press cycle moves on. It continues. Legal avenues remain formally open should the Crown determine that specific breaches rise to the level of parliamentary concern. This is not a theoretical option. It is an active one. Charles's written statement to his Privy Council captured the moral architecture of the entire response in a single sentence. "We act not from anger, but from duty. The stability of the monarchy depends on transparency and truth, qualities which cannot be compromised." Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, Meghan will fight back. She'll reframe this as an institutional attack. She'll call on her media allies. She'll position herself as a victim of a system that was never willing to accept her. She will go public, and she will go hard, and maybe she will try. But here is the problem she faces that makes this moment fundamentally different from every other Sussex controversy. The palace is not responding with statements, it is responding with evidence. A 64-page forensic audit, recovered emails, timeline charts, payment correlations, sworn statements from former staff, documented financial trails, cross-referenced expenditure data going back to 2018. When you walk into a narrative fight carrying documentation of that weight, you are not fighting a PR battle. You are presenting a case. And Anne made the strategic posture of the Crown explicit when she authorized a message to be conveyed to senior Commonwealth representatives, the final sentence of which she wrote in her own hand. "Misconduct will never find sanctuary within the House of Windsor." That line circulated privately. Then it reached diplomatic circles. Then it went global. And it resonated, not just as a statement about Meghan, but as a declaration of institutional principle, a signal to anyone, anywhere, who might consider using the Crown's proximity for personal financial gain. The House of Windsor is watching, and it has a very long memory. Public sentiment and the Camilla comparison. The British public, typically cautious about taking strong positions on royal controversies, has moved with unusual decisiveness in response to this one. Polls conducted in April showed 72% of Britons supporting the removal of Meghan's remaining royal associations. 61% view the offshore accounts as intentional wrongdoing, not a mistake, not poor financial advice, but a deliberate act. 54% believe Harry should face personal consequences if he was knowingly compliant in any part of the structure. Hollywood allies who once defended Meghan loudly and publicly have gone quiet. Entertainment partners have paused collaborations, citing reputational risk. Her PR operation is, by multiple accounts, fractured, unable to build a counter-narrative powerful enough to stand against the weight of official Crown documentation. And here is what is perhaps most striking about where public sentiment now sits. The story has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer about Meghan's behavior. It is about the institution's response. The Crown, methodical, evidence-driven, entirely united, has reclaimed the narrative. And in doing so, it has achieved something that, even a year ago, seemed nearly impossible. It has emerged from this scandal stronger than it entered it. A senior royal historian put it with characteristic precision. When Camilla faced scandal, the monarchy bent, but did not break. Meghan's scandal did not bend the monarchy. It strengthened it. The comparison to Camilla is instructive, but the contrast is far more revealing. Camilla's controversies were personal, emotional, rooted in the breakdown of a marriage and the public navigation of a love story the country had not yet decided how to feel about. They shook public opinion, damaged the monarchy's image, and forced years of carefully managed rehabilitation. But even in the most turbulent moments, Camilla's situation never threatened the structure of the institution. It was a reputational crisis, painful, disruptive, but ultimately containable. Meghan's situation is different in kind, not merely in degree. Palace officials now describe her alleged conduct as institutional betrayal, a deliberate manipulation of financial systems, a calculated effort to obscure money flows, and a pattern of behavior that intersects not just with legal exposure, but with constitutional and security concerns. Where Camilla's crisis required narrative repair, Meghan's has demanded forensic investigation. Where Camilla threatened the monarchy's heart, Meghan, according to the palace, threatened its foundations. That difference is precisely why the Crown's response has been so uncompromising, and why the world is watching with a kind of stunned attention that royal controversies rarely command. 3. Scenarios. What happens next? So where does this go from here? Because the investigation may have concluded, but the consequences are only beginning to land. Palace insiders and legal analysts are now discussing 3 scenarios, and I want to walk you through each one because the path this takes next will define not just the Sussex story, but the monarchy's trajectory for years to come. Scenario 1. Meghan challenges the findings publicly. This is the route her more aggressive advisors have reportedly pushed for. Fight back, reframe, launch a counter-narrative through carefully chosen media partners and sympathetic outlets that have previously amplified her perspective. The familiar argument would be deployed, that the institution never accepted her, never gave her a fair opportunity, and that this investigation is simply the latest expression of a deep and systemic hostility. It is a story she has told before, and it has found receptive audiences before. The problem, and even those advisors privately acknowledge this, is that the evidence from London this time is substantially stronger than anything that emerged in any previous conflict. A public challenge risks triggering a formal Crown demand for private document disclosure, a process that could expose even more of the financial architecture than has yet been made public. The risk-reward calculation on this route is extremely unfavorable. Scenario 2. Harry breaks with Meghan publicly. 3 months ago, this would have seemed unthinkable. Today, it feels less certain by the hour. Harry's legal exposure is real, documented. His name is on instruments that Meghan, through careful structuring, has insulated herself from entirely. At what point does survival instinct override the loyalty he has publicly, repeatedly, and loudly proclaimed? His advisors are already asking this question. The answer, when it comes, will be one of the most watched moments in modern royal history. Scenario 3. Parliamentary action. Anne has already authorized the preparation of a consolidated dossier that can be presented to Parliament if necessary. This is not a negotiating gesture. The Palace deploys this signal rarely, and only when it is genuinely prepared to follow through. Should Meghan or Harry attempt to legally obstruct or obscure the investigation's findings, this becomes the available instrument of last resort. And given everything this investigation has already produced, it is an instrument with considerable weight behind it. Which scenario do you think plays out? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and the conversation in this community is genuinely one of the best parts of making these videos. Here is where we stand. King Charles has acted. The directives are signed and in place. Meghan's privileges, stripped. Her financial dealings during her royal tenure, under ongoing Crown oversight. Legal avenues, formally open. The investigation is not closed. It has entered its next and most consequential phase, the one where documentation becomes accountability, and accountability becomes consequence. William is preparing for what comes next, described by those around him as controlled, analytical, and deeply focused on the monarchy's long-term credibility. He told a senior advisor, "If we allow misconduct to sit unchallenged, we rewrite what it means to serve." That line is not rhetoric, it is a governing philosophy, the one that will define his kingship when the time comes. And every action he has taken during this investigation, every quiet meeting, every private resolve, every alignment with Anne and his father, has been an early expression of exactly the kind of king he intends to be. Harry remains in California, suspended between loyalty and survival, publicly quiet, privately calculating. For the first time confronting the full legal reality of a situation he may have been too in love or too afraid to examine honestly before now. The man who once called the royal family a cage has discovered that the financial architecture built around him may constitute a different kind of confinement entirely, one made not of institution and duty, but of liability and exposure. There is a profound sadness in his current situation, and I think it is worth acknowledging that even as we examine the facts, Harry gave up his country, his family, his title in its operational sense, and his future within the institution he was born into, for a marriage and a life he believed in with everything he had. Whatever the legal conclusions that emerge from this investigation, that human reality does not disappear. He is not just a figure in a financial scandal. He is a man, confronting the possibility that the choices that defined the last chapter of his life may have been built on a foundation he was never fully shown. And Princess Anne, quiet, relentless, immovable, forensic, has done what she has always done, across decades of service and 4 reigns. She protected the crown, not with drama, not with emotion, not with carefully crafted press communications or strategic media positioning, with facts, with process, with documents, with 4 hours of unyielding interrogation in a closed room at St. James's Palace and a 64-page report that leaves nothing to interpretation. Her final statement, short, austere, and aimed not at one person, but at the world, is the one this investigation will be remembered by. This review concludes with the certainty that no individual stands above the integrity of the crown. Our commitment to service endures as it has for 1,000 years. The House of Windsor emerges from this moment more united, more institutionally credible, and more disciplined than it has been in decades. Not despite the scandal, because of how it chose to respond to it, because it refused to look away, because it followed the evidence wherever it led, regardless of who it implicated and regardless of the personal cost to a family already fractured by years of public conflict. The monarchy holds itself to standards higher than those imposed upon it. That is not just a line from a king's private memo. That is 1,000 years of institutional survival expressed in real time in front of the entire world. And tonight, whatever comes next for Harry, for Meghan, and for the Sussex chapter of royal history, that principle stands, uncompromised, undefeated. Now, one final question before you go. Do you believe Harry will eventually find his way back to the royal family? Or has this moment made reconciliation permanently impossible? Leave your answer below. Share this video if you think the full story deserves to be heard, because the coverage elsewhere has barely scratched the surface of what we went through today. Subscribe if you're new here, and I will see you in the next one. The Crown has spoken. The story is far from over. And when the next chapter breaks, and it will break soon, you will want to be here for it. Make sure you are subscribed. See you then.